We're winding up here now, and our next speaker, mystery man, right? Arizona Adam. We don't have any last name or anything like that. Jack Crime Fire by night. Arizona Adam. You know his brother, Jersey Jasper? No, I'm just kidding. Indiana Jones. Arizona Adam is an owner-builder and a builder science educator. To learn more about Arizona Adam, visit the YouTube channel, Arizona Adam. Okay, then it has an email address as well. You could come to me if you need it. I have it right here. Arizona Adam will be offering a presentation on building control layers and thermodynamics at our upcoming Southwest Alternative Building Conference on May 18th. That's today, 2024. Penny, why do you give me this stuff and embarrass me? Then it says, ha ha, Bill, I got you. No, not really. Not really. All right, please welcome Arizona Adam.
Just the nerds left now, right? It's about to say I'm a lot more, I thought I was a lot more nervous than I was going to be, but I'm actually the exact amount of nervous. Just plenty. So, building control layers and some, just a little bit of thermodynamics. It's really not as fancy or smart as it sounds. I just wanted a really impressive title, because I'm pretentious. It's really simple stuff, I promise. So that's me. As you can see, I have a penchant for the dramatic. I read so many comic books when I was a kid. But this is my YouTube channel where I upload lots of free content. I also have a website of the same name. Quick plug, I strongly encourage people to use these calculators I made. I got one for calculating your solar power needs, and another one for rainwater catchment. And a lot of the solar ones, you know, they try to put you through a sales funnel. I don't do that. It's just totally free. And the rainwater one, I programmed the pitch of the roof into my algorithm, so you get a little more data than you would with the other ones. Anyways, that's my shameless promotion. So here are some progress photos of the house I'm currently working on. I have to admit, I feel like a real square here because it's just boards and concrete. There's no tires or glass bottles or my old CD collection or anything. Just so you know, I'm not faking this stuff. So, what are control layers? Simply put, they keep the things we want outside out of the building and the things we want inside in the building. So, you know, on a cold day, we want the heat to stay inside. We don't want it leaking out. We also want to control things like moisture and air. We'll go more in depth. Some common examples of things, we all know these things, but they also tend to function as control layers. Cladding, sheathing, a house wrap, insulation. And over here we can see examples of all that stuff. So we've got some clapboard siding right there going up on a rain screen. That's going to be like our first line of defense against water and other things that can damage the building. House wrap. I don't know that company. Actually, I've never heard of them. I mean, I just stole this picture off the internet. So, no sponsorship there or anything. We got a house wrap. We got some insulation. And this is just, you know, this is just one example. Lots of different ways you can go about building a structure. Of course, that's why we're here. But yeah, these are just some common things. And I also have to say, nothing I'm going to talk about here is really new or alternative. So why talk about this stuff at an alternative building conference when people have known this stuff for decades and it's only becoming more mainstream? And it's because if you get your control layers right, you can build any kind of house you want, any style, any method, and you're probably going to be happy with it as long as you also do everything else right. So you can see here we've got an earth bag home. I don't know these people. Again, I just stole that off the internet. But they seem like nice people, so I don't think they mind. Shipping container house. My wife's parents just finished building a shipping container house. That's not it. I also stole that off the internet. For some reason, we have no pictures of their house. And I just showed you I'm building a stick frame house. And again, that's not it. It just seemed like it would be weird to put my picture next to the stolen ones. But if you screw up control layers, you're probably going to be pretty upset with the house you end up with. Maybe not at first, but after the novelty wears off and you've spent some time living in it, you might be disappointed. I know that because I'm that guy. So 6 years ago, I started building this tiny house. I affectionately call it the scrap house. I think you can see why. Some of these photos are very old, like this one here. I just finished the pallet floors. Never going to do that again. It's not worth the effort, I promise. I do get a lot of compliments, though, so I guess that made it worth it. But when I started this, I was new to all this stuff. I really didn't know much, and I really didn't have much experience. In a common sense way, I understood that building assemblies have layers. I knew about insulation and cladding. But I didn't really understand control layers, and some of them I just didn't take seriously. I didn't know any better. And I've suffered for it, and I'll go more in depth on that. Also, I want to say, I swear I did not know these lights were multicolored when I purchased them. You can imagine my embarrassment the first time I turned them on. Now everybody thinks I love rainbows. But anyway, yeah, I definitely made a lot of mistakes with this house, and just put it simply, it's quite uncomfortable most of the year. This time of year when the weather's just sort of right, it's nice. It sucks in the winter and it sucks in the summer. It's really hot and really cold, and there are other problems that I'll get into. So, control layers. So I'm just going to be talking about the top 4 here, water, air, vapor, and thermal. For our climate, we don't really need to think about vapor much. In fact, it's kind of best to just forget about it. I'll talk a lot more about that in a minute, but we don't want to get too hung up on this one. Over here to the right, I have, and by the way, I spent many days working on this drawing, so please don't laugh at it. This is an abstraction of a wall assembly. This could also be a roof or a floor, just rotate it. But we're just going to pretend this is a wall. And I just use simple bars so that you can project whatever you want onto this, because everybody's going to have a different style of building, or I assume so anyway. So typically how this goes is we'll start with a water control layer, and that's usually integrated with the air control layer, but they can also be separate and combined. So again, this could be something like a house wrap. Many house wraps function as both. They give you an air seal and a water seal. After that, if applicable, a vapor retarder or vapor barrier. And then thermal, so it could be insulation, that could be thermal mass, ideally a combination. And then whatever the rest of your assembly is. And they don't have to go in this order. You can change things up. So we could go water, air, maybe that's a concrete block, and then insulation and a vapor retarder, and then drywall or whatever siding you like. Now I will get into why these are the top 4, and in this order. I've always interpreted it as what's going to do the most damage to your building. Though thermal can sort of have a dual meaning. So water. Yeah. It is, statistically, it's the horse of death for buildings locally. And you're going to notice that I'm not going to talk about natural disasters at all, acts of God. Because this is more about things that buildings have to deal with on a continuous basis. And even out here in the desert, we're going to have to contend with water. We have a monsoon season, and we also get a little bit of a rainy season in the winter. And we also have water in the vapor form as humidity. So yeah, we're not talking about floods or fires or anything like that. But if you think about it, most natural disasters do bring a lot of water with them. So kind of a double whammy. But yeah, water, it's the #1 thing that can really mess up a house. So it's got to be taken the most seriously in terms of keeping it out of the building completely. And it's really challenging. I'm working on a parapet style roof right now. I just put silicone over it, and I learned the hard way how hard it really is to truly keep water out of the building. A lot of people think their buildings are watertight, but they're really not. They just don't see what it's doing. Next up, air. Now air is the number 2 problem because air is water's buddy. They're homies. Air brings water into the house, and it can do it in 2 ways. It can bring it in a liquid form, it can bring it in the vapor form, or as humidity. And air is much better at transporting humidity than humidity is by itself diffusing through materials. So if you've got an air leak somewhere in your assembly, maybe it's only the size of like a screw head, but it's a decent enough air leak, it's bringing water into the assembly in that form of humidity. And once it gets down into your wall cavity or your ceiling cavity, wherever, it's probably going to meet a cold condensing surface. It's going to turn into liquid water. And then if you did a good job insulating your house, it's going to be basically trapped in there. So that's the number 1 reason that air is a big problem. Also wind-driven rain, right? I mean, if you've ever been through a monsoon season up here, you know what it's like when we get one of those rainstorms and it's basically just blowing sideways. That's going to get pushed past your cladding and start to make its way into the assembly. That's the reason for a rain screen, perhaps, the house wrap, or other water-resistant barriers, because that wind-driven rain will get forced into the house, whether you like it or not. Other problems with air, obviously it's not good for thermal performance. I mean, if you got a drafty house, right, all your warm air is leaking out of the house, or vice versa, leaking into the house. And air leaks can provide ingress for pests and pollutants. Like the one if you got something the size of a screw head maybe, a lot of bugs can fit through that. Mold spores, pollen, things we don't want. That's why we really want to have a lot of control over how the air is entering the building. So you can control what it's bringing with it. If it's just coming in however it can, not good air quality. And like I just mentioned, it's really windy, like really windy, especially if you're out in the mountains where I am. So yeah, could it be a problem for air to push things we don't want into the building? Yeah, definitely. I think one of the presenters right before me mentioned something about 60, 70 mile per hour gusts hitting the house from the south face. I got the same problem out where we are. And that could also be a structural problem, but we're not going to get into any engineering, and I'm not qualified. Vapor is boring. Next slide. Just kidding. Vapor. So this is not a building. Well, maybe it's a building for ants, but it's a long English cucumber. This will make sense, I promise. So last month my wife bought this huge box of produce. It was like 70 pounds for cheap. And it was just random. And she got something like 50 cucumbers. And half of them were wrapped in plastic like this, and the other half were not. And we can't fit that many cucumbers in our tiny little fridge, so some of them had to go into a cooler, along with some other produce. As soon as I put them in the cooler, I realized I better crack the lid on it so the humidity in here doesn't build up. So I did, and the next day when I came back, yeah, this, what you see here is what I found. The cucumbers that were wrapped in plastic got moldy and rotted significantly faster than the ones that weren't. They actually rotted out faster than anything else in that cooler. Nothing else was wrapped in plastic. And there's a good reason for that. The cucumber is mostly water. It's like 90-something% water. And the rest of it's maybe a little bit of fiber, some simple starch, simple sugar. As the water was trying to escape the cucumber to get into the much warmer, drier air around it, it couldn't, because that's a class 1 vapor barrier. And I checked that seal. It was sealed tightly. There were no runs or tears or anything in it. So all the moisture just got trapped up against the cucumber. And mold only needs 3 things to live and to thrive. Water, first and foremost, a little bit of food, a little bit of warmth. So this was a mold farm. The other pieces of produce that weren't wrapped didn't really have this problem because the moisture was getting out of the cooler and they were just drying out. This is what can happen to your wall if you mess around with vapor barriers and you put them in the wrong spot. That's why in a desert climate where we have drying potential all year round, I say just don't even screw with them. Let your assembly dry to the outside or dry to the inside, doesn't matter. Just let things dry. If it gets wet and it dries out, it's fine. If it gets wet and the water stays there for a long time, that's when it's a really big problem. And even in the desert, that can be a problem because, you know, most of the homes we've seen here today, they've all been about really high thermal performance, right? Kind of passive house stuff. They don't need cooling, they don't need heating. Well, that means there's no energy exchange. And so if there's no energy exchange, you don't have any drying potential. So even though we don't get water frequently here, if it gets into an assembly that really has no drying potential, it could stay there for a long time. And it doesn't just mean rot. You know, insects need water. Rodents need water. Every living thing needs water, so you probably want to be the only thing living in your house. Yeah. And so that's why I say just don't, in this climate, don't even screw around with vapor retardants. Also, a lot of other materials that we commonly use naturally function as vapor retardants just the way they are. So there's no reason to know. So like plywood, for example, I think that's a class 3, just bare by itself. There's no reason to start introducing this stuff. And then lastly, thermal. And I've broken this into 2. So thermal just as heat, energy. Heat damages stuff. I've made the mistake of leaving plastic tools in the sun on a summer day. So what we want to do is we want to use mitigators to help protect our buildings from heat. Because especially in this climate, we're right at the top of the UV index. So even if the ambient temperature isn't that hot, I don't know, maybe 60-something degrees, the sun is still cooking our buildings. So some of this stuff's really common sense, light colors and shiny materials. So I mentioned I just put silicone on our roof. It's so reflective, I have to dress like that now when I go up there this time of year, or else I'll just get cooked to death. I burn like a vampire in the sun. So I picked the best place to build my dream house. Radiant barriers where applicable, shade, so things like, you know, awnings, covered porches. Not a big fan of like trees and shrubs right next to the house. I don't know if you've ever seen a tree fall on a house. It's not, I could tell you some stories. And then the building shape and orientation. This can also make a difference. You know, you think about something like a pyramid, right? It's kind of ironic because those are usually in hot desert climates. But if you got something pyramid shaped, just due to the nature of its shape, it's always getting hit almost entirely by full sunlight across all surfaces. So it also has a very poor surface to volume ratio, which isn't, so the space on the inside is much smaller relative to the space on the outside. So it's not great for thermal performance. So you can do a lot of research on which shapes are the best for you know, thermal performance and protecting your building from heat. The other side of thermal is thermal performance. So poor thermal control also damages our comfort in the building. Here's a very old picture of me with love of my life, Maggie. Sorry, Taryn. You can tell by my still mostly black hair and that smile on my face that the stress of building my own houses had not caught up to me yet. It had gotten to Maggie at this point, though. She's all white in the beard, and her face isn't lying. It's cold in there. You can see that bare OSB, so that's before I put any insulation in the building or any siding on the inside. And I can tell by the natural light that this was taken during the day, which means it was really, really, really cold in there if this was daytime and we were bundled up like that. So I do consider myself an expert when it comes to thermal discomfort. And thermal was one of those layers that, I mean, sure, I knew about insulations. I just didn't take it seriously enough. Because every other house I ever lived in had a thermostat. If it got too cold or it got too hot, I just switched on the thermostat. I cared when the energy bill came later, but you know, and it was just convenient, and I didn't think about the fact that, for the most part, none of the homes or apartments I ever lived in before were actually thermally efficient. They weren't. I just had the convenience of HVAC or mini splits or radiators, and this house doesn't have any of that. And so when I thought, you know, with my like 4-inch thick walls, and I did use like old bottles and cans and stuff like that to insulate the walls, I thought like, oh yeah, this will be fine. Well, because I did it in May. First time winter rolled around, well, this is what happened. Yeah, I figured out how to install a wood stove quick. Let's see here. Oops, be stuck. There you go. All right, so now the thermodynamics portion. Full disclosure, I'm not a physicist. I know I come across as one. I only play one on YouTube. I did get an almost perfect score on my GED exam, if that counts for anything. So this is my super scientific interpretation of the second law. So wherever there's not a lot of something, that thing is going to try to get there. So this is an atomically inaccurate representation of whatever you want it to be. We could pretend that's air, water, heat, all of the above. That's the outside of the building. This is the inside of your house. There's a little bit of this stuff, but not nearly as much. So this is going to get there. And it's tenacious. It's going to do it any way it can. And I really like to think about this stuff on the molecular scale that we're thinking about. Because our naked eye might look at some surface and think, oh yeah, well that's solid, right? Like water's not going to pass through that. Nothing's going to pass through. Oh yes, it can. And again, I learned that trying to water seal on a mostly flat roof this winter actually. We had a lot of snow and a lot of rain. And there were plenty of times that I looked at that whole roof like I was going over it with a magnifying glass, and I thought like, oh yeah, the leaks are done. No. Because you're literally, so the difference between water and vapor is that vapor is a single molecule of H2O. Water, liquid water, is billions of them stuck together. So one molecule of H2O, it's just 3 atoms, right? One drop of water, which is billions of those stuff, it's trillions of atoms. It can get through stuff. Yeah. And, again, we can flip this around. So, that could be the inside of your house, and that's the outside. And now you got a lot of something on the inside that you want to keep in there, but it's trying like hell to make its way to the outside, and it's really good at it. So another way we can think about this in simple terms is that water moves from wet to dry, air moves from high pressure to low pressure, vapor moves from damp to dry, so very similar to water, and heat moves from hot to cold. So everything just goes from more to less all of the time. This is an oversimplification, but again, like we're not physicists, we're just trying to build houses. This is all we really need to understand. And here are some real life examples why it's important to know this. So, we heat our tiny house with a wood stove. I imagine a lot of other people here probably use wood burners or plan on something like that for their house. Pellet stove, fireplace. If you've got a fireplace in your living room, and hey, there's nothing wrong with them, I love them, but if you got one in your living room, it's burning up oxygen, right? But it's sucking air right out of the house. Right. So hundreds of cubic feet of air are just going out every minute or less, depending on the efficiency. And so what does that mean? Well, you're depressurizing the building, you're using up all the fresh air, and so now that you've created this vacuum in your house, nature's going to try to fill it. It's going to force air in. And so if you don't have a good way of a fresh air intake, of bringing the air in a controlled fashion, it's just going to squeeze it in there any way it can. Or you're going to suffocate and die from carbon monoxide poisoning. It's worst case scenario. Another way you could think of it is like maybe you like to take really long hot showers, or maybe you want to install a jacuzzi in your master bathroom or something like that. Well, when you fill up that space with all of that vapor, that steam, that humidity, and it's like 30% RH outside, well, it's going to also try to get outside. And it's going to diffuse through the walls and the ceilings and all of your layers. And then that's why I brought up, like, don't mess with vapor barriers, because then if it gets stuck and it doesn't make it to the outside, it's just getting stuck in your wall. So basically, going back to that like fireplace or the wood stove example, you basically have this inside of your house. It's a little Spaceballs reference for the older folks. Some of the younger people are like, what? Yeah, and I think we have just enough time for me to go over some bonus control layers, because it's not, people only talk about the top 4, but there are other control layers. Now, if you get the top 4 right, you're probably going to take care of these, just as like a side effect of getting the first 4 right, but not always. So noise, this is one that's near and dear to me, because I actually have a mental illness called misophonia. I'm extremely irritated by noises that other people make. And you know, you move out here, you probably have a lot of acreage, neighbors are really, really far away, and you think like, yeah, I'm not gonna have to worry about noise. And then, you know, like some squatters move into the house next door and they bring a dozen feral dogs with them that bark all night. I might know somebody. I mean, just... in my experience, keeping noise out of a building is actually harder than any of the elements I just talked. It's actually harder than water or air because it can resonate. It can turn your house into an instrument, into a drum. You need a lot of mass, a lot of insulation, and you know, maybe put some careful thought into where potential noises might be coming from and decide how you're going to orient your house according to that. Pests. So if you have really good air control and water control, you're probably not going to have a pest problem. I have. A house mouse infestation is like one of the worst things you could ever deal with in your life. It's more infuriating than a fly infestation, that we've had that. And it's even worse than the flesh-eating beetles, believe it or not. But sometimes what you're using as an air control layer might not be any good against pests. So for example, maybe you're using EPS or XPS, basically styrofoam, as exterior insulation, and that creates a water and air barrier, but for some reason ants love it. I don't know, I tried it myself. One time I got some styrofoam from like an Amazon package or something. I just threw it on the ground. It was a stupid styrofoam. I just threw it on the ground just to see what would happen. And I came back the next day and sure enough it was covered in black ants. They really liked the stuff. So sometimes what you're using for air and water control, not that they aren't good at that, but they're not really good at keeping pests out. So and we also have subterranean termites in this area. So that's another thing to be cognizant of. And then lastly, light. And you know, this is an interesting one because, again, like if you do a good job on the thermal performance, you probably won't have a lot of light. You know, we've heard many of the other presenters today talk about how they've used awnings and overhangs to control light throughout the seasons. Brilliant. But yeah, put thought into that because if natural light's coming into the building, well, it is bringing heat energy with it. And that can be a problem out here where it tends to get very, very hot during the day and especially during the summer months. And light can also just be a nuisance. You know, I don't like bright light waking me up in the morning. You know, pay attention to the movement of the sun throughout the seasons. And again, think about the orientation of your house and some of these controls you'll take to control how the light comes in or goes out. You also don't want your bright lights bothering other people that might be around you. And on that note, I think that's it. Questions? I'm sorry, did someone have a question? Yeah.
Why did you choose a parapet just for the parapet roof for a specific reason?
Yeah, no, great reason. So number one, I'm afraid of heights. So I seriously did not want to go on like a steep pitch roof and have to do the roofing myself. So like that really was part of the logic. Also, I went with a fairly high one, so it is about 4 feet high. That's going to help with keeping dirt and debris off of the roof. You know, it's very windy and we get dust storms and stuff, so it's going to kind of knock some of that back. There are also benefits like with casting shade over the roof throughout different times of the day with that high air. Exactly, yes. So that's like, you know, that's natural cooling. I mean, that's knocking, if the direct sunlight's not hitting the roof, it's really not getting that hot. And yeah, I could go on for like half an hour about parapets, but yeah, there was a lot of thought behind that. Anybody else? Oh, yes.
How's your hand?
Much better, thank you. Yeah, I can use a remote again. Yeah, thank you for asking. Anybody else? I was bitten by a rattlesnake. That's what I did.
What?
Yeah, last week.
The #1 candidate for me for insulation is rock mineral wool. Do you have anything?
Yeah, I do. So rock wool is a brand. You might already know that. And I like the stuff, but people get kind of like mineral wool. So like fiberglass is mineral wool because it's made out of glass. Glass is a mineral, essentially, because it comes from sand and silica. So There's a lot of mineral wool. I would say shop around. I'm going to be using some stone wool in our ceiling cavity, but I'm not going to use the rock wool brand. I'm going to use Owens Corning or something like John's Manville or something like that. That's significantly less per square foot. So yeah, just same stuff, yeah. And it's you know, it's the only leg up it really has over fiberglass is that it's truly hydrophobic. So fiberglass insulation, the only real downside to it is that if you were to get a big water leak, it can at a certain point get saturated, and then it sags and it doesn't return back to its normal shape, and so you've lost the performance of it. Whereas rock wool is so hydrophobic, it won't ever saturate or sag. And that's really the only leg up it has over fiberglass.
Fire protection more over fiberglass, just no paper on there?
No, they're both non-combustible. Yeah. Because again, the fire, well, yeah, I mean, yeah, if it's paper-faced, and out here I wouldn't use paper-faced anything. Like, you know, I didn't talk about a fire control layer, but we should really, that's like the natural disaster we should probably be the most concerned with out here for sure. So yeah, I wouldn't use paper-faced gypsum or any kind of paper-faced insulation. That crap paper, like they're putting it on there to be a vapor retarder. And again, we just don't need that.
Yeah, we found rock would be a little bit more easier to work with than fiberglass, just be more like cotton candy or rock wood, like a solid mat.
Yeah, it's more rigid. Yeah, that's one of the reasons I'm going to be using it in the ceiling cavity of my house. So like in my walls, I'm just using standard fiberglass bats. And the ceiling, for that rigidity that you just mentioned, I'm going to be using. That's one of the reasons. Yeah. And but you know, handling it. So it's a well-known fact that if the fibers from fiberglass get into the air and you breathe those in, that's really bad for your lungs because they don't come out typically. I don't know if the data on rock wool is as conclusive, but I would imagine any fibrous insulation is something you don't want to inhale. So yeah, handling it and working with it all kind of is the same at the end. Yes?
Adam, shipping containers. A lot of people buy shipping containers to store one thing and another and end up baking things. What is the best thermal control or the best control layer?
Yeah, excellent, excellent.
With a shipping container.
The best thing is external insulation. Okay, yeah, sure, no. Yeah, I mean, that can be a spray foam, that could be a rigid insulation, so like rigid mineral wool, for example. You could spray on closed cell spray foam, or you could buy rigid sheets of closed cell spray foam and attach that. So you could use like a foil-faced polyisocyanurate, for example. Sorry? Yeah. Oh, and yeah, see, a lot of people don't do that because they want the shipping container look. But really, they should be insulated from the outside. Now, I have one that I'm using for storage. I call it the warehouse. That's all it's for. I actually have a video on my YouTube you can check out, and a companion article on my website. So what I did was I just chose to paint the container, and I painted it first with a white oil-based primer because that creates a vapor barrier. And on steel, you do want a vapor barrier because you don't want it to rust, of course. Acrylic and latex paints are too breathable. So I put the oil-based primer on. And then I went over that with an acrylic paint. And I used a bright orange color, kind of a bright orange red, because colors towards the red end of the visible light spectrum, when they hit surfaces, they generate the most heat. So if you can bounce that back, that's a good way to use colors if you don't want to go with just plain white, which is of course the best. But for the roof, we just left it white, and then the sides we used the bright orange. And that was a glossy paint as well, because the shinier, just anytime you see a reflection, that's an indication to you that some heat is being reflected away.
What about wood?
Oh, excuse me. Who guessed that?
What about wood for the container home on the outside?
Oh, you can absolutely do wood cladding. So like, I'll go back to, if I was going to build a container house. Sorry. I do it just like that. That's exactly how I build a container house. Yeah.
Have you ever heard of someone
that. I mean, I don't personally know anybody that's done that or have seen it, but I don't see why that wouldn't work. Yeah, that should be fine. Yeah.
Well, that would work for sure.
Yeah. There was somebody back there that had a question.
Right here.
Yeah, the subterranean termites, do you know anything about how to control for that, especially if you've got a semi-submerged structure?
Okay, yeah, well, sorry man, you kind of just like defeated. The best control is being high up off the ground. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, you really don't want to let wood come in contact with the ground out here. Sometimes you have to. I mean, like, you know, we all have to set fence posts and things like that from time. And even if you use pressure treated, they'll still, they get sick and die if they eat it, but they'll try anyway. I tend to paint wood that I know is going to be in contact with the ground, because if you put a good coat of paint on some wood, like a fence post, that can act as a bit of just a deterrent, because they don't really like to eat paint. They want to get at the wood.
If you don't have wood, do you have to really even worry about them?
What do you got, masonry thing?
I don't know. I mean, maybe a better question is, when do you have to worry about subterranean termites?
Wood exclusively.
Just wood, okay.
Yeah, now they tunnel. They make mud tunnels, and they can also tunnel through cementatious things and masonry and earthen materials and stuff. So like if you've got wood on the inside and it's down underground, they might, you know, you really want to make sure that you're almost talking about like a semi-basement thing, right, going a little below grade. So you just want to make sure that that's really, really air and watertight, and you want to do that anyway. If it's really air and watertight, subterranean termites won't get in there, and then you won't have any problems. Yeah. Somebody else? Yeah.
You mentioned you're painting your roof with silicone. Is that high-end, expensive, like Snow White silicone coating that reflects silicone?
Exactly, yeah. And it is it's not the most expensive choice for a rooftop, like a semi-flat roof. There are, you know, like torched asphalt's more expensive. As far as fluid applied, I think butyl rubber is the only thing that's more expensive. But yeah, it's up there. Silicone, so like, sorry, try to be quick here, Bruce. So there are pitches, there are some like slight slopes within this roof that go towards a drain, but it's basically just called flat. And so you don't want to use like an acrylic-based formula on that, because those are water-based, so it'll degrade if too much standing water. Anytime you're going to have standing water, silicone or some other method like asphalt is best. Oh, and that was, we're all wrapped up? We have one more, or that's it?
You can do one more.
Okay, one last question. Anybody? Oh, yes.
Actually, just a comment, and I don't know the validity of it, but a local told me that there's a Japanese method of scorching your wood before you treat it that actually helps the termite issue.
Yes, I know the name of it, I'm struggling. That's it, yeah. I don't have the cojones to try it. But yeah, from what I've heard, yeah, that'll also like, I mean, it just helps preserve the wood in general. It helps protect it from moisture, and I've heard it even makes it more fire resistant if it were to come in contact with flames again. But yeah, definitely something to look into. Okay, well, I guess that's going to be it.